Deuteronomy 21 to 25 today, continuing Moses' big speech and continuing the theme of very short points. If anything, actually in this section they get even shorter, so there's quite a few really small bits to fly through. It opens with what to do if you find a dead body in a field and it's not clear who did it. Basically you've got to measure how close it is to the nearest town, go to that town, get the elders, some big atonement type ritual that involves bringing in a cow, then breaking the cow's neck. I don't know how you do that. If you've seen a cow up close, that's a big old neck. That's going to need some serious work to do that. It seems all very weird, but I think the further I get into this, the more examples you see of stuff, and then something else later on makes a bit more sense. And it seems like it might be something to do with the idea of complacency, I guess. So you see something on the news in modern times, and it's terrible, and oh, it's terrible, and how terrible it is. Then you stub your toe, and you're more concerned about that. And I think that's probably a natural response. I don't think you could necessarily criticise people for that. But it seems that this big old ritual, we have to get all the elders together, make this big song and dance, and break a cow's neck, and do things, and all the rest of it. I guess that's perhaps aimed at some complacency, so at least society doesn't get to the point where it's just, oh, well, there's another dead body in a field, or stub my toe, I'm just going to go and have some lunch. I don't know, I might be making that up, but that feels like that would fit for why that might be happening. There's talk about what to do if you're in battle with another city and you capture some women. If you happen to take a fancy to one of them, you can marry them. They have to shave their head though, so bear that in mind. It doesn't sound like they have to keep their head shaved. They have to shave their head, have a month of mourning, and then all is well. But it does note that you can't treat them as a slave, so you have got to treat them properly as a wife. And it feels like that maybe that's another example potentially of, rather than God endorsing going stealing people and doing what you like with them, more accepting that sort of thing is what society's doing at this stage, and then putting a limit on it, controlling it. Speaking of having wives, there's talk of polygamy, and that it seems okay to have two wives, but there's a specification that if you have sons by both your wives, if the firstborn son is from your least favourite wife, that's an interesting idea, isn't it? You still have to treat them as your primary son, whether or not it's from the wife you prefer, because the firstborn son is a sign of a father's strength. Okay, there's nothing particularly strong or clever about breeding, is there? I mean, everybody knows some really stupid people have managed to breed, usually in conjunction with other stupid people, but yeah, there's nothing. I don't understand how that's a reflection of a father's strength to have managed to breed and bear a son. I guess maybe that could be a difference in the time, but these days you can have particularly useless men just sitting around doing nothing, because life won't immediately punish you for doing nothing. For you sit on your bum for 5 years and play computer games and not really do very much for yourself. You will get away with that for a while, or it will seem like you're getting away with that for a while. Back then, perhaps that's not so true. If you don't do that, you don't eat. So I don't know if maybe something in the difference between then and now. That does actually relevant to what goes on next. There's talk of what to do if your son is rebellious and a bit of a drunkard and useless and all the rest of it. You have to take him to the town elders, announce this fact, and then have all the men in the town stone him to death. Clearly the point is, you can't be a useless bum back then. It just wasn't going to be a thing, because you literally get stoned. So potentially that ties into perhaps a higher standard of manhood across the board or something. Therefore, if you manage to win a woman in order to breed, I don't know. That's a bit weird, but a lot of this is a bit weird, isn't it? It's clearly a very, very different time to now, and it's difficult without some of that context. There's specified that there shall be no cross-dressing. God detests this, apparently. It's odd in an age where to our modern considerations in the West, all the blokes are wearing skirts. God clearly being uncool with anything that falls outside of a very traditional gender stereotype. Another one, sign of the times, the talk of if a man marries a woman and then discovers on the wedding night that she wasn't a virgin, if he then goes and makes a big old complaint about this, saying she's not a virgin, and it turns out he was lying, he gets punished. If it turns out, however, he was right and she wasn't a virgin, then she is to be stoned to death. And the mention from that is then you need to purge the evil from among you. Okay, yeah. Another one that's not aged particularly well, I think. On the subject of divorce, it does seem that you could divorce people back then, but it does read like only men can divorce women, not the other way around. Which again sort of grates on modern times, because my understanding is that something like 80% of divorces these days are instigated by the woman. We have what seems like the first instance ever of advice on plumbing. It's specified that for your number twos, you need to go outside the camp, dig a hole, and there's mention of this being indecent otherwise, and God may turn away from you. And it's, okay, fine, but surely the point would be that God would be everywhere, so it's not like you can go outside the camp and do whatever you like and God won't then know about it. So I assume that's some sort of metaphorical idea of, you know, just be a bit civilised and keep the place clean. You know, a first attempt to introduce some sort of sewage system, albeit very, very basic, involving a shovel. But yeah, there's something interesting in some practical direction from God on what they should be doing. You'd think it might have been sort of obvious that would have been a good way to progress with that, but there we go. This is, after all, a society that had to be told it's not okay to go to bed with your mother or donkey, so yeah. There's a specific rule about not charging interest to fellow Israelites, which, well, it's more terrible financial advice, isn't it? It doesn't seem like a very good basis for any sort of financial security. Well, perhaps that's the point, but I guess that's where the Sharia mortgages come from, in that if it's still based on this idea that you can't charge interest, I gather they're structured in such a way to sort of kind of get around the interest, but you still pay for the money, so it's almost like God needs to be a little bit dumb to not notice that there's a bit of a loophole going on there, which, if it exists, seems unlikely. But that would seem to be another example where there's a problem with modern societies basing how they structure their civilizations on old-fashioned rules from three and a bit thousand years ago. That there's nothing to indicate that these aren't going to be for all time, except that some of these rules are different to what they were previously, so they are already evolving. So yes, it doesn't seem like that was necessarily meant to be the case. Then we're back to some slightly odd stuff. There's a talk about if the two men are having a fight and the wife of one of them comes to his rescue, then if she, in the process of defending him, grabs the nuts of the attacker, assailant, whatever, then she has to have her hand chopped off afterwards. I mean, yeah, sure, maybe some hand sanitizer might be nice after that, but chopping the hand off, it must be one of those things where there's more to it, because on the basis that men on average are much bigger than women on average, the chances are a woman having to come to the rescue of her husband is going to have, if you'll pardon the expression, her hands full in dealing with having to physically fight with a man. It would make perfect sense go for a sensitive area, and to take that away on fear of having your hand chopped off, you kind of, there must be more to that, but it's not clear from it what's going on there. But that's not particularly unusual, really. And then finally, there's this odd bit down to the detail saying you won't have different weights and measures in your house. Like, what? But actually, reading on, that probably makes some sense. I think it illustrates beautifully, actually, the idea that on face value, you're left with, I beg your pardon, what on earth are you talking about? It makes no sense at all. But then it links back to, it's mentioned that there will be no dishonesty. So it implies that if you're going to do some sort of dealing, you could have false weights to falsify the size of something or weight of something that you're selling. Okay, great, that's fine. But it does make you wonder how many other bits, because if you just mention the weights, you have two different weights and measures. Okay, bit odd. So I think that's part of the growing context that's been proving very useful, actually, in reading through. And a lot of this stuff has more to it. And there's going to be some historical context, which I don't understand. But yeah, I suppose that's the theme at the minute. That's some things are sort of falling into place a little bit, and things are starting to make a bit more sense, I think. But yeah, so that was a nice quick section. Loads of little bits in that. Again, very useful context against Numbers and Leviticus. But on to the next one.